Welcome, everybody, at this first webinar between IUFoST and EFFoST as part of the Scientific Roundtable discussion, an open dialogue series. And this first webinar is Recipe for Health, How Food Processing and Formulation shape nutritional value. Please note this webinar will be recorded and the video will be shared with you afterwards. The last 25 minutes of this webinar will be open for questions. Please post them in the Q&A box at the bottom of your screen, so not in the chat, but in the Q&A. Your questions will be answered as much as possible during the webinar, and any remaining questions that are open will be followed up and shared with you afterwards. But no further delay, I would now like to give the floor to the president of IUFoST, Samuel Guthrie.
Thank you, Gabriela, and good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever you are around the world. On behalf of the International Union of Food Science and Technology, I would like to thank the leadership of the European Federation of Food Science and Technology and express our appreciation to be joining forces in the organization of this series of scientific roundtables. Starting with today's theme, the recipe for health, how food processing and formulation shape nutritional value. IUFoST being the global voice of food science and technology, promoting these disciplines as a means to ensure food safety, quality, and security of the world's food supply, cannot subtract itself from the discussions on food processing, food formulation, and their interrelationship with the nutrition value of food. The series of scientific roundtables that we are about to kick off will explore the science behind food processing, including the role of formulation in balancing the health benefits, the taste, safety, and sustainability of food. We are very thankful to the group of experts gathered today to present and discuss the work of the IUFoST Task Force on food processing for nutrition, diet, and health, and look forward to an engaging discussion. I'm delighted to introduce Professor Vincenzo Fogliano, President of EFFoST, who will kick off this session. Vincenzo, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Samuel, very much for your kind words, and welcome everybody to this webinar. I'm very happy that EFFoST and IUFoST joined forces for this scientific roundtable discussion. Of course, the topic is super hot. Everybody's following the discussion also on the social media and on the press on the topic. I'm afraid that the discussion is also going into some toxic element. And as a scientific societies, we want really to bring back this to the evidence, the scientific evidence, and to the what we can do. I always say that food technologists should be proud of what they do for the planet, for the humanity, because at the end we are those really feeding the planet. So I think this is something important to say and to stand for our professionals. In this respect, I think IUFoST made a great effort in finding a mediation and a sort of a common position. And so I'm very happy to have the opportunity to introduce Professor Erik Windab, who is giving the main speech today. Erik has been a full professor at food process engineer at the Institute of Food, Nutrition and Health at ETH Zurich until 2022. Now is chairing the food technology platform at the Swiss Academy of Technical Science. And also he took the chair of this IUFoST Task Force on processing for nutrition, diet and health. So Erik, the word is yours. We are all ears to listen from you.
So thanks a lot for your introduction. I'm just starting sharing the screen and entering into the presentation mode for this presentation, which I want to give. Refining the role of processing in food classification systems will be my topic. As I mentioned, I will explain processing in the context also of NOVA, quantify nutrition value and formulation, as well as processing, derive a scheme which we have worked out in the task force, which was mentioned, the IUFoST Task Force, show how we can extend to multi-dimensional quantification and finalize with recommendations, what we could offer for Nova refinement, assistance, and a summary. So the extended food value chain starts on the harvesting side and goes beyond the point of purchase via the point of consumption, because we also have home processing, oral processing, digestive and metabolic processing to reach out for health support and disease risks. We have a bit two hemispheres, which are divided by the point of purchase, where industry and consumer may kind of meet each other, consumers' interest and industry interest. Now, along the value chain, and this is why I was pronouncing that processing plays a role across the entire of this extended value chain. So, and Nova is the classification who has fortunately brought in the discussion about processing, because processing is a key in respect to nutrition and other food property characteristics. When we look at the Nova classification, we can divide the 4 different groups, as many of you may know, from and minimally processed, processed ingredients, processed foods, ultra-processed foods. And when we read this, we assume that there is a degree of processing increasing from group 1 to 4. However, when we study a bit more in detail what are criteria to belong to, and that a food belongs to one of these groups, we see that the addition of sodium, of sugar, of saturated fats, of some cosmetic additives, as it's sometimes called, is the key issue in order to sort into the groups. And this is from a food processing and from a food science perspective, formulation and not processing. So this gives a bit of discrepancy in understanding between the denomination of the groups and the criteria in order to enter these groups. If on such a base, classification should be done at the point of consumption, so we have certainly a problem, because there is no separation of quantification and quantification of formulation and processing, and even the target property, the nutrition value, is not quantified. And with this ambiguity mentioned before, we have a bit of a weak correlation base for something which is typically done by Nova, correlating with a health support or disease risk, including obesity risk. In addition, epidemiological studies often are observational only and, let's say, not considering confounders. So the evidence or causal relationship base is rather weak, and we thought this should be strengthened, and we wanted to approach this. So since Nova is so far a bit ambiguous and not straightforward to be applied, so what can we do? What could the task force work out and suggest? Because Nova classification has been adopted by authorities, and ultra-processed food as the new junk food in some cases by a growing proportion of consumers, and we do not want to make this move into the wrong direction. So all the confrontation with the ultra-processed food was tackled by the task force, and so suggestions worked out how we might assist to make it better. So we started with differentiating the definitions of formulation and processing. Formulation as the systematic selection of relative quantities of ingredients for a food product, and processing as treatment of a food material to achieve a desired effect. Now, starting with the target property, which is the nutrition value in this context, how can we quantify this? When we look around, and we wanted to certainly lean on methods which are used in the community of the experts for human nutrition. So nutrition profiling methods are like Nutri-Score, like Health Star Rating, and the Nutrition-Rich Food Index. We decided to take the latter, the Nutrition-Rich Food Index, because we experienced that this can be well handled, is scientifically based. So what is behind? The Nutrition-Rich Food Index, to define the nutrition value, would typically identify disqualifying nutrients like sodium, sugars, saturated fat, fatty acids, and qualifying nutrients like the proteins, vitamins, minerals, and so forth. The number of these gives the number of this NRF, the Nutrition-Rich Food Index, so 9 nutrients qualifying, 3 nutrients disqualifying, and the terms which are calculated for these qualifying and disqualifying ones are dimensionless ratios of the mass of these ingredients or these nutrients divided by the daily intake, the recommended daily intake. This can be calculated also with respect to a base, like a portion base of 100 kilocalories, or it could also be 100 grams or per serving. What we reach from, let's say, the two terms for the qualifying and the disqualifying ones, the NR9 would be for 9 qualifying, the to be limited nutrients are 3 in this exemplary case. We would get a dimensionless number, so between roughly minus 200 and plus 300 is possible. On the minus side, very much on the low minus side, sugared beverages, highly sugared beverages. On the higher plus side, some fruit juices, fruit sauces from fresh fruits, for example. With this, we in principle have already a quantitative formulation, let's say, or for the impact on the nutrition value. So the formulation can be described by the nutrition-rich food index with respect to what nutrition value is behind. Now, the next step would now be the processing, because we saw formulation and processing should not be mixed and should be clearly defined, as I showed before. So how do we go for quantifying the impact of processing on the nutrition value? So we leaned on what is typical, let's say, for food engineers to do balance equations. The food engineers do energy balances, mass balances, and what does that mean? Just to introduce you to that, you have a system. Our system is the process. Energy E1 goes in, energy E2 goes out, and the delta E is what the system consumes, or it can be a sink or a source of energy, and the same with mass. So we just build the delta and know what is the impact of the process. The same could be done with a quantitative value for the nutrition value. We saw NRF 9.3 could be such a definition, and what goes in and what goes out can be done also by investigating the nutrition-rich food index before and after having processed the system. The one before delivers already the nutrition value for the formulation, as we saw before, and the difference between what goes in and what goes out as nutrition value is delivering a delta NRF, and which is a characteristic then of the processing impact on the nutrition value defined in such a way. Okay, with this, we have a quantification of both, of the formulation and of the processing, and we can look at the suitable diagram, which we have suggested from the task force, where on the x-axis we have the formulation expressed by the NRF 9.3, as introduced before, and the processing axis is the y-axis with the delta NRF 9.3. So let's start on the zero line of processing, because this is where we just built our recipe and fix the formulation. Let's assume we have a formulation which can be placed at a certain NRF value here and in this point P1. If you spoil, say, the quality of your formulation, like by adding sugar or sodium, you would move into the negative direction, so from the P1 to the P2. If you would do the opposite, concentrating like vitamins or maybe proteins or fibers, so you would move from the P1 to the P3. So F plus formulation plus, you would improve. As soon as processing aspects come into the play, so you also have a contribution along the y-axis. So if we go from our formulation P1 into a positive impact of the processing, we go to P4. So we go along this inclined track, which is inclined by 45 degrees, which is depending on the construction of this diagram, which I will come to. So you go up to the P4. If you would spoil the quality of or reduce the nutrition value, you would go to the lower left, P minus, means having a process which is kind of spoiling or deteriorating your nutrition value. So with this, we can in principle play with combinations of recipe changes, formulation changes, and processing impacts. And I introduced, just make you aware, we have so-called isolines of an additional factor, additional index, which we call FPFI. This is a formulation and processing food index. The superscript N means with respect to the nutrition value. I will come to this, why we can introduce, or why we might be interested to introduce such a parameter. First of all, I want to give you an example, and you already see in the background like a traffic light scheme, a color scheme, which is moving from the dark red to the dark green along these diagonal lines. That means these FPFI index I just introduced. is in principle determining this underlaid color scheme. But let's go to the content of this diagram and take an example like a raw carrot. A raw carrot would be high up at the NRF. The formulation would be highly nutritious. If you would cook the diet, so you go to the lower left because some vitamins may get lost in the cooking water or by the heat impact, depending on the degree of heating and certainly the processing conditions. If you would go for glazed carrots and first add some sugar to your formulation, you would certainly go to the left on the zero line, on the zero processing line, because you reduce the quality of or the nutrition value of your system. If you would then cook, you go to the lower left. An example to improve, let's say, by processing would be a pea protein isolate, so isolation of a protein, concentrating a protein. If you take care, depending on the processing, that you don't lose minerals and vitamins, so you would shoot up, let's say, to the upper right and improve. Okay, let's summarize. So we have clear definitions of the formulation-based nutrition value by the NRF, as we saw, even though it's now limited only to the nutrients recommended and the nutrients to be limited, the qualifying and the disqualifying ones. We will see whether we can broaden this, but it's a clear quantitative way to describe the formulation impact of the nutrition value, and the delta NRF, as mentioned, just the NRF after processing minus the NRF before processing, the delta across the processing system doing this balance is a clear quantitative measure for the processing. If we couple the two, so we may have a linear coupling. You see here the NRF and the delta NRF are linearly coupled. So to this coupled value, I just give one short explanation. It might be interesting, instead of making it more complex and characterizing the nutrition value by impacts from formulation and processing, you might be interested to recouple this when we think about simplifying for the consumer. I will come back to this point a bit later when we have got a bit more of an overview. Now, for the nutrition value, we are fine. We can separate the impact of processing and formulation. We could, let's say, analyze it by both of these parameters, NRF or delta NRF, or we could go for a recoupling in a one parameter, which would couple the benefits or the impacts on the nutrition from formulation and from processing side. However, what we saw is that we might have to widen our system. The nutrition value is one of the system properties of the food properties of interest. There is sustainability, safety, affordability, convenience, palatability. And depending on the type of processing, such a profile may change. Depending on whether you aim to optimize the nutrition value or the shelf life, you may process differently, or different processes may lead to a different result. So that means in a more generic view on classification, can we include other characteristics than the nutrition value? And at the same time, I want to ask the question, can we widen, let's say, the nutrition value in its definition? Because there is many more aspects contributing to the nutrition value than only the formulation-based sorting into qualifying and disqualifying components. So let me give an example, because a typical, certainly ultra-processed system would be plant-based extruded meat analogues, because what goes through extrusion processing here for adjusting texture and tenderness would be denoted according to NOVA as ultra-processed. So when I want to tackle something like plant-based proteins of interest for such types of products, so the nutrition value would certainly be relevant to be characterized as we did before by NRF and delta NRF, but I want to show you already an extension possibility considering anti-nutrients, because anti-nutrients will decide about the bioavailability of some of the micronutrients, minerals in particular, but also have an impact on the interaction with the proteins. I will also show you for other properties like sustainability and digestibility of the proteins in such a system. Sustainability, because many of these meat analogues are based on soy. So how do other of these characteristics fit, or can they be tackled by the scheme which I'm introducing? So We saw formulation and processing can be coming back to our equations or our definitions we have done before with these qualifying and disqualifying nutrients. And what we do now is in extension taking anti-nutrients into account. I jump on phytate or phytic acid, and we could define a term which is an anti-nutrient term, which is the mass of anti-nutrients divided by an acceptable intake of these, which you can add to your equations with a minus, because when you reduce this term, you are better on the nutrition value side from the formulation side. And if the delta here, you have a larger delta, so you subtract, you deactivate more of the anti-nutrient, which is also better for the result. So when we consider this, we are back to this type of diagram which I showed you, and now I want to refer again to the x-axis where we have the formulation NRF, and what I'm doing now here is the NRF 9.3 as discussed before, and when we consider the anti-nutrient phytate, so I'm adding, let's say, this phytate term, which I introduced before, and denoted as NRF 9.3.1. So the 1 stands for the anti-nutrient 1 considered component, which is the phytate. So if I start in the conventional way, not considering anti-nutrients, I would be on the 0 line, starting at this point where the blue line is starting. If I start with the phytate considered, because the phytate is certainly as anti-nutrient a negative impact on the nutrition value, I'm starting shifted to the left, because I have a lower NRF. However, during the processing, as you can see, inactivating the anti-nutrient, I'm shooting up. If I'm doing, let's say, alkaline extraction, I have to specify the processes and precipitation and extrusion and autoclaving. I can come even a bit further in deactivating and ending up at a high level of NRF and also of this coupled parameter, which I have briefly introduced before. So we can demonstrate, let's say, the additional positive impact of the process on the deactivation, the inactivation of the anti-nutrient in such a case. Okay, let me also show the protein digestibility. So this would be now entering into digestive processing. And digestive processing, we are interested in these meat analogs. How are the proteins digestible? On the x-axis, the formulation is denoted or is described by the PDCAS, which is a protein digestibility corrected amino acid score. You can measure this. So the PDCAS for the formulation of your meat analog, plant-based proteins containing. So you are here on the X scale for the formulation, and a delta PDCAS, how would it change during processing, is on the Y-axis. And now you can, from literature, find data for different grains, soy, pea, wheat, and oat. For the pure formulation, this is the dry grains, let's say. And then for either extrusion or extraction, I show you the darker arrows. The darker colored arrows are for extrusion. The more bright ones are for extraction. You can see how it would go up from the more reddish domain, let's say, to a more greenish or yellowish domain. Why? Because the inactivation or the denaturation of our, not inactivation, but denaturation, unfolding of the proteins can make it better digestible. So we increase digestibility by treating in extruders or by extraction. So we just have to find the right parameter like the PDCAS to express this digestibility, but this is known from literature. Last but not least, if we go for some sustainability aspect, and other of these important key parameters for the quality of a food product. So we also have to choose again a suitable parameter expressing sustainability in an appropriate, feasible manner, like the global warming potential, GWP, which I have been choosing here. So again, our formulation will have a certain greenhouse warming, global warming potential on the x-axis here for the formulation description, and the processing will change it. So because typically processing adds energy consumption, so reduces the quality of our system in terms of sustainability, means increases the global warming potential. And this is why you can see now the green color is here on the left. I just turned the diagram, and the red corner is upper right. So we go into a less good direction if we apply more energy or if the global warming potential is increased. Again, we can differentiate between extrusion and extraction, and that means the handling of how to characterize the formulation and then have the delta of this parameter as the processing impact identified also works for sustainability, as I show here. Okay, let's come back to where we started, the extended food value chain, because how can we now summarize what we have found and how we deal with the elements, with the toolbox which we have generated? We have NRF as the characteristics for the nutrition value. We can measure an NRF going into a process, coming out of the process, and accordingly get a delta NRF. And we have seen that this is highly valuable for differentiating between formulation processing and quantify the impact of formulation processing on our target property nutrition value. In the context of NOVA, it's the nutrition value in place, but we could also shift it or extend it to other characteristics. Now, if we have this, let's say, quantified, differentiated and quantified, so we can certainly also enter into the classification at the point of consumption, or the point of purchase, typically. And now we have a much stronger base, because we have a quantitative differentiated base for correlations with the health support and the disease risks. If we would add even, some more detailed investigations, and which I showed you as an example, protein digestibility, we could even add elements along this home processing, oral processing, digestive and metabolic processing in order in the future to build, let's say, a cascade of causal relationships to build the bridge to the health support, the disease risk or obesity risk, and not rely only on correlations. So this is certainly what we suggest as an assistance for using our scheme as assistance for ANOVA refinement, taking these elements into account and with this destroy the ambiguities and improve, let's say, the applicability of a classification scheme. Okay, with this I summarize. The nutrition value can be described quantitatively. The NRF was a good base to start with. It can be extended because nutrition value has to include many other elements we may be interested in. Formulation and processing impacts on the nutrition value can be described by this definition of the nutrition value NRF, and its change during processing means delta NRF. We can have a graphical representation. I showed you this diagram in which we can have these two parameters, NRF and delta NRF, for differentiating the impact of processing and formulation. And this facilitates certainly playing with coupled formulation steps and processing steps, which along a manufacturing line typically exist. These points 1 to 4 define what we call this IUFoST formulation and processing classification scheme, this IF and PC as it's abbreviated. And we also showed that we can extend this. We can extend the scheme to other parameters in the value chain, in an extended value chain, even to digestive and metabolic processing, which is a big thing with our colleagues from the nutrition sciences to be tackled in the future on a science-based and then substantiate and quantify it. We could also we can also suggest that the points 1 to 4 can assist for refinement of the NOVA classification. And with the 0.6 going into digestive and metabolic processing, even add more substantiated information for evidence-based causal relationships, no longer relying only on correlations, which are certainly not necessarily if some confounders cannot be considered, and only observational studies being done, so cannot fulfill the task. Okay, finally, let me recommend that IUFoST and IUFoST scientists, standing for the food engineers, for the food scientists, the nutritionists, the communities, are now encouraged, because this is a base, this is a starting platform, to use it, test it, validate and apply it, and finally refine it, because there has to be a development in stepping further based on this IF and PC approach. So this is our recommendation. We are, together with IUFoST and EFFoST, certainly also very much supporting actions into this direction. With this, I would like to thank you for your attention. And the questions will be then, let's say, shifted to the panel. So, but if you have questions, you can add them in the Q&A, as mentioned by Gabriela, and we will come to your questions. So thanks for your attention and your questions under Q&A. Thank you. With this, I would like to hand over the floor to Professor Lilia Arne, who will be active in sharing now with us activities for the panel. And she will moderate and be the facilitator for the panel. Professor Lilia Arne is past president of EFFoST and also professor in dairy process technology at the University of Copenhagen. She has a PhD in food engineering. And she is very much interested in research to understand the effect of processing on physical, chemical, and structural characteristics of foods, and use this knowledge to develop new processes. She's a fellow of IUFoST, so the Academy of IUFoST. And now the floor is yours, Lilia, for sharing with us the panel discussion. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Frederick, for this introduction and a very nice presentation. And I'd like to say good morning or afternoon to all the attendees. And I mean, the panel today, in addition to Professor Samuel Godefroy and Professor Vincenzo Flugiano and Professor Eric Winter, as I say, I would like also to present two other panel members today coming from the nutrition side that is quite important for our discussion. So the first person that I want to introduce is Professor Hyun-Soo Kim, and she is president-elect of the International Union of Nutritional Sciences, and she will become president now in the Congress in August. So we'll look forward also to further collaboration with you. So Professor Hyun-Soo is professor at the Department of Food and Nutrition at Sukmukgu Women's University in Seoul, in Korea. And your research interests are regarding nutritional immunology and nutrition in aging. So the other person that we have with us, that's also very important for our work, is Professor Barbara Schinman, and she is Emeritus Professor of Nutrition at the University of California, Davis, US. And Professor Barbara has been the director of the Office of Nutrition, Labeling and Dietary Supplements at Food and Drug Administration, FDA. And she has also chaired the Dietary Guidelines Advisory Committee, which is quite relevant also in the context of our work. So I welcome all of you to this panel debate. And I will start, in fact, with kind of a general question. I mean, IUFoST and this task force has been created to discuss these effects of processing on nutrition, diet and health in general. So it is important to discuss the relevance of this work. Why do we bother in doing it, and why it is important for us? And my first question goes to Professor Sam Godefroy. And in fact, I ask him, from your perspective, from the IUFoST, why do you think this work of the task force is important from a global, and I mean, I also ask from a regulatory perspective, because you are very much engaged in such aspects. Samuel, what do you think?
Thank you for the question, Lilia. And again, it really goes with the mandate of IUFoST. Now, IUFoST being there to advance food science and technology, and food processing is one of these interventions that plays a major role in improving food preservation, shelf life, including actually nutrient retention. Now, food processing tends to be combined with other interventions that can impact also the nutrition value of food. For IUFoST, setting this task force was our contribution to bring together the intersection of these scientific disciplines. These scientific disciplines that are involved in food processing, in nutrition, in public health, all of these tend to have, of course, impacts on a myriad of policy agendas, including, of course, on regulatory agendas. And as you have heard from Professor Windab, there was a focus made on food classification systems. And this is, of course, stems from the recognition that these systems that are being developed and being used, they have several purposes, but that includes also regulatory purposes. They tend to play a pivotal role. They tend to shape policies. They tend to even shape the way we inform the public about food, but even actually the way we conduct research about food. And I believe, again, what the task force attempted to do here is to contribute to these methodological aspects that govern these discussions of food classification. Our intent, of course, is to have such classifications, given their importance in shaping these policy agendas and in guiding the decision-making process. So we need to have these food classification systems to drive research on the nutritional and societal impacts, but taking into account the various parameters that tend to have an impact. And I think actually from what Eric showed is that the tendency that we may have had to single out one parameter, and that is the processing parameter, as the key element that may define these classifications could be considered as having some shortcomings and could be considered as limiting. We tend to associate, practically following that approach, processed or processing systematically with negative health outcomes, such as obesity, diabetes, and others. So in doing that, we wanted to make sure that we do not omit the contribution of the other interventions, particularly formulation interventions. And now that the task force is there and actually conducted, what I would consider actually a significant amount of work. We hope that this will keep the scientific discussion alive. Definitely, actually having the input of the various expertise in those disciplines, and making sure that whatever we come up with in the classification systems is methodologically sound and therefore useful in informing our policy and regulatory decisions.
Yeah, I think makes very good sense, Samuel. Thank you. And I think it brings, in fact, to a next point to talk about different fields of expertises that are needed. And in fact, I give my question now to Professor Seon-Soo Kim. What do you think, why or is there a need for a closer collaboration between human nutrition experts and food scientists or food engineers in order to improve human nutrition? And how important do you see that the integration of processing aspects are important in that context? I'd like to hear your opinion.
Okay, Lilia, thank you very much for your question and giving me a chance to answer about your question. I'd like to answer especially in the nutritional standpoint. As you know, most of the current classification system have limitations of the nutrient-centric approach or just degree of processing itself, not the wholesome dietary approach. So in that essence, it's really, desirable that the IUFoST formulation and processing classification system that Eric just explained to us is very much, desirable and the one that we should go, forward. And this approach also adopt the concept, not only the nutrition, but also the sustainability, safety, affordability, convenience, and palatability that kind of thing. So I think this is very, very timely and crucial approach for the right food classification system. And the other thing I like to point out is reminding that the goal of selecting food is a healthy choice for well-balanced, healthy life. So in other words, everybody, why do we eat? Beyond the energy consumption and nutrient consumption, we want to be healthy. So much more holistic approach is needed for better health outcomes. For instance, if we can apply the concept of health index, such as the one related with the chronic disease risks, such as obesity or heart disease or diabetes, it could be a genuine contribution for the global human health promotion. So one more last thing I like to focus is that the collaborative, unified approach among the experts from food science and nutritional science and public health medical parts is truly important and momentous. So thereby we can develop a comprehensive food classification system, and that reflects the modern, dietary needs. So like this, I like to emphasize once again the collaboration.
Thank you very much for saying so, because I also think we have to have all the players in the table and construct this together. And I mean, I want my next question, in fact, is to Professor Vicente Flugiano, and also based on your research expertises on the design of innovative healthy foods. So, I mean, are there also problematic aspects seen for the classification of foods in terms of processing and processing impact? And what do you see as advantages in the approach that is proposed now, as Eric also presented?
Thank you, Lilia. Of course, it's complicated. I mean, the food is complicated matters, although everybody eats and everybody think they have something to say about food. It's a complicated story. So what actually I really like of this effort that has been done, of this formulation and processing classification, is that it's comprehensive. It's really something accurate, something that we can be expanded, as Eric elegantly show. So it can really take all the aspects into account. So when you formulate or when you develop, let's say, a new food product, now I was thinking the cell-based foods, that's a kind of classification we can play with, because that's something that can really embrace all the aspects. So, and in this respect, it's exactly the opposite of 1, 2, 3, 4. I mean, I don't. That's in this respect is a big advantage from the scientific perspective. I really would like that all the scientists will try to use this in a different papers and so on when they wanna tackle this aspect. On the other hand, we have to be aware that we are talking a completely different language than what is happened with the UPF story and NOVA. There is more philosophy and whatever, a big story without the real science. And here we are on the opposite side. We are really talking very good science, scientific evidence, digestibility, how this is improve affordability, but also sustainability, how we can measure. So that's a really, I see, although this is started as a kind of way to find a common ground, inevitably this is coming more in even, two different grounds. So it's, to me, this is a fantastic opportunity for all the food scientists, nutritionists, working in the product development to underpin their effort with some solid numbers. So thank you very much.
No, thank you. I think it's very good that you take this point, because I mean, also this about to quantify this nutritional value of foods. And in fact, my question, in fact, goes to Professor Barbara Schima now. Do you think this nutritional food, rich food index is suitable for the description of the nutritional value? And is that, and I'm thinking more, is that useful in making recommendations to consumers, because you are working with the dietary guidelines? And and also, in fact, if you can tell for the ones that are producing food. Thank you.
Yeah, great. Thank you. And thank you for the comments that we've been having in terms of the value of the approach that was developed by the task force. I think the advantage of the NRF framework is that it's recognizing what we want to encourage, the nutrients we need to get enough of, but also what needs to be limited in the diet for association with disease risk. And as Eric pointed out, there are ways that we can extend the NRF to consider other factors that related to nutrition value. I think what's important to understand is we took that from work that was done in the United States as an index. And so the nutrients that are incorporated in that index are the nutrients or food components of public health concern within a particular area. But that illustrates then that as you want to adapt this system to other countries and other locales, then it becomes important to understand what are the nutrients and food components of public health interest in that particular setting. So again, it gives the flexibility of the approach that it can be adapted to countries like the US, it can be adapted to developing countries where the nutrition issues may take on a slightly different profile. And there's been an emphasis, and FAO and WHO have been behind it, of developing food-based dietary guidelines. So to take the nutrient information and translate that into food-based advice for consumers. And I would say that up to this point, formulation has probably been the driving consideration in food-based recommendations, in part because it gets you to understand, are you getting enough of the nutrients? Are you limiting the foods like sugars and saturated fat and sodium? So it drives the analysis of that profile. And where processing has come in, it's usually about the food choices that you may have. You can eat fruit, or you can eat frozen fruit. You can have beans, or you can have canned beans. And to how to use food labeling to make sure you're making the best choice. So I think one of the reasons formulation has been such a driver is that we have clinical studies. We have the kind of causal evidence that Eric has referred to let us feel confident in those recommendations. And by defining a way that we can now look at processing, we can move in that direction with processing to develop causal evidence so it can be used then in food-based dietary guidelines. So it's a growing field, and as has been pointed out, the research needs are really clearly defined now in terms of what we need to do if we really want to include processing in how we make recommendations.
Yeah, very, very good. Thank you, Barb. I think I understand, the complexity also of doing so. And in fact, my next question goes to Eric. Do you see, this nutritional value, so is the target food property and the discussion, could that be more comprehensively described than the nutritional rich food index, even if this one can be used as a base? How, and if so, how could that be tackled?
Yeah. No, thanks for the question. So, because I think this will probably be a question many of the people who listen for the first time to this IF and PC scheme, which I have introduced, how is it too much narrowed to, let's say, just the formulation? And this is why I just try to give these one examples with the anti-nutrients. I mean, the beauty of this definition is that you can add terms, and I mean, it's really up to the nutritionists together with the food scientists to say what besides anti-nutrients, maybe components which can be generated by processing. We had this acrylamide problem in the past, considering such components which maybe the processing may cause the generation of such. We could think about matrix effects. How do we change the matrix? How can we then express, let's say, the impact of processing on the release out of a matrix for the goodies, for the components we want to deliver in a bio available way? So, I mean, this is always the choice or the definition of the parameter describing the key property we are looking for is important and needs the creativity. And then we can formulate these terms to be added to a modified NRF. And you may not call it any longer NRF if you want, or call it modified NRF. But I mean, the beauty is that we can, in principle, play with such parameters and be inspired by terms to be introduced from a nutritional perspective, and also, let's say, from a feasibility perspective, when industry views will come in at the end of the day.
Yeah, I mean, you have always this limiting factor, right, that can be expressed in different ways. I mean, back a little bit also to your present. Now I keep you on this. I mean, we talk about this nutritional value is a key food property, right, of a food product, but you also mention others. Talk about safety, sustainability, palatability, and so on. I mean, how could we manage such a multi-food property approach? And I mean, how can we then maybe reach consumers? Maybe I'll ask Barbara about that one afterwards. But how do you see from your perspective how to embrace this?
Yeah, it's very important that we thanks a lot, because it's a key question. We are now discussing on a scientific level. We are making it more complex. We are separating, let's say, the nutrition value in a dependency on formulation, on processing, which already makes it a bit more complex. But from a scientific, from a logical perspective, brings also more clarity because we can quantify. Now, when we are adding sustainability and all the other key aspects which you mentioned, so at the end of the day, we may have 6 or 7 or 8 of these characteristics. And what would be the two extremes? The one extreme would be to accumulate this into one parameter, which is a sum, an integrative parameter, but this won't tell you much, because I mean, you can compensate the one against the other, and this would not give you, let's say, a simple traffic light explanation for this. So I would tend to go for using technologies which are upcoming, artificial intelligence based, so-called multi-scale systems, where you can have a kind of QR codes where you could differentiate between different aspects. So the vision I would give on the way, on the scientists level, we are tackling all this higher degree of complexation. So the view angle should be that we can integrate this in such a multi-scale coding scheme, where a consumer at the end of the day may read a more complex QR code and then just point out whether he or she is interested in the nutrition value, in the degree of sustainability, in the affordability. So really look for the own pattern, which is of relevance individually for this consumer, because not everybody is similarly weighing for sustainability or for the nutrition value. So giving it the own, let's say, personalized touch in checking where along these different scales the system, the food product which is evaluated, is placed. And I mean, this will also train the consumers in making their choice according to their preferences and their mainly weighted characteristics along which they are interested in to choose their diet. So I think this is we have an outlook to technologies which can manage doing so. And I don't think that a traffic light system will be feasible for more complex type of descriptions. So, but I would go the way I just explained rudimentarily, but I think it will go that way.
Is there time for a quick
Barbara,
comment?
please. I was in fact passing you because I mean sustainable nutrition is a major interest.
Yeah. Well, what I think is important is recognizing the complexity. You know, food is a complex system. Our metabolism is a complex system. We're mixing these complex systems. And one of the approach that has been used is a technique called food pattern modeling, where you set the parameters that you want to be sure and achieve in terms of recommended nutrient intakes and those food components to limit. And now you start modeling dietary patterns can meet that. And there are a wide variety of dietary patterns that can live within those constraints. And in fact, there's a scientist in the US who intentionally used a food pattern modeling and included foods classified as ultra-processed foods, and you could meet the dietary guidelines recommendations and still have a high proportion of UPF. So again, it's recognizing that there's no single magic dietary pattern, but as we learn more about formulation issues, processing issues, we can feed that into the modeling systems and give examples to consumers of different dietary patterns that help them meet the recommendations and hopefully help lower their risk for non-communicable diseases.
Barbara, I think it's, acknowledge the complexity, of course, is important. I mean, I will just, we are running a little bit late, but I still think it's important this the way forward. I mean, what are we going to do in the short and maybe long term? In fact, I pass to Vincenzo first. I mean, do you think it's, I mean, how could you implement this in the future and promote this concerted action where food scientists, human nutrition and or nutrition and human health people can get together, and how could this be properly supported? Vincenzo, do you hear me?
Sorry. Yeah, I think maybe I already answered partially before to this, because I told that we, let's say that the food technologies part, we can surely support by using this. That's what we have to do. We have to use it and showing, because, you know, every paper is read by many people. And so if we start using it, cite it, that's something that we can surely do in a positive way. Let's say at the same time, I think that what we can also do is be more active in this aspect in the all the social media type, but also conferences and so on. So let's say that for many years we were like, okay, no, that's at the end, Barbara was saying very well before, is the dietary pattern that count, and you can obtain, you know, the dietary pattern is made by, yeah, it's true, is made by food, but we can mix all type of food and having, you know, the suitable dietary pattern depending on the different personality activities and so on. That's really matter when you count on health. The single food, depends on the amount, it depends. So it's not really, so we knew this already. And that's the reason why we didn't take this whole story very seriously for years. So now, okay, we understood that we have to take it seriously. And now we have a tool that is an answer, transparent, that we can use to, you know, play the same game from the scientific perspective. So I think really my recommendation is use it. We have to use it. We have to find a way in each paper with the technological aspect, modification, improvement, development of new type of ingredients, food, to add a paragraph that say, okay, if we look at this from the, let's say, from the perspective of a classification of a processing and formulation, this is what we are bringing in. So, and becoming a kind of a normality to use it to show that on our side, we have nothing to hide. I mean, we know that some processing improve the digestibility or destroy the vitamin C or whatever they do. So we know this, and this is transparent, is a well solid knowledge, and we can quantify. So being more open and direct on this aspect, I think it is a way of doing that we have to change.
Yeah. Thank you, Vincenzo. I mean, just a short, I still would like to ask this one to Xion Su. I mean, how do you see the chance to aligning IUNS with IUFoST, but also with FAO and the Codex Alimentarius? Do you have an opinion there?
All right, thank you, Lilia. I like to emphasize that the need for the collaboration between the IUNS and IUFoST cannot be overemphasized. As you know, the food science and nutritional science is inevitably related, making human body as a mediator. We have a common goal, healthy life. So one side story cannot make a whole picture. So not only need, it's also kind of our responsibility. We work together and get the synergy to get the right direction for the, the robust food classification system. And then after making that system, we have to implement to the food labeling. And also we have to educate people for the labeling literacy. So for all this kind of thing, we need help, kind of, as you said, FAO or the Codex. So we need to make, the whole comprehensive group to make a better solution for this food classification system, I think. Yes.
Oh, makes good sense. And this passes me to Samuel to finish. I mean, yeah, how do we effectively, from the IUFoST side, can we support the dissemination globally of this approach?
Well, I think actually, first of all, I would not, I would have to echo really what Hyun-Suk has said about really the need to maintain this collaboration and the exchange between the nutrition science community and the food science community, and really bringing that broad approach and broad picture together as a key element of that. Now, in terms of really trying to answer your question, Lilia, I think I would probably start by where Eric finished. Eric, in his conclusion, indicated, try it, refine it. Take this approach, try it, refine it, and let's see what the outputs would be. Now, I think the approach that was developed also has really the advantage of enabling us to bring or to overlay all the other parameters that consumers care about right now, such as sustainability, for example, and other considerations that consumers are interested in. And actually, these are elements that may guide the decision-making process. And should there be any temptation to use the outputs of a classification system for decision-making, I think it's very important that we ensure that it is methodologically sound, even if it is retrospectively, meaning to go back and to learn from what we did, to make sure that if there are negative repercussions, we essentially are able to prevent them, not only to mitigate them. And finally, I would say that a forum such as this one, maintaining the discussion and maintaining really the dialogue in a scientific way, in exchanging really both methodological aspects, point of views, and also the implications of what we are doing is also a key element that we need to sustain over the coming period. And you have our commitment with yours and with the global community to continue in this direction. So again, thank you for this effort.
Thank you, Samuel. Appreciate. I mean, I will pass now to Gabriella. That is collecting, and we'll ask some of the questions in Q&A. Gabriella,
there are some interesting questions.
Yeah.
It came up in the Q&A, but thank you, Lilia, for leading this very interesting panel discussion. I think some of the questions have already been answered, but with the risk that we double on them, I still want to pose them. So there are a couple of questions on really how to implement this system and how to get it more familiar with. So, for instance, will this framework be shared with the UN and the World Health Organization? But also in relation to ministries of health, some already have prioritized the NOVA classification, and public policies are based on it. So how do you propose that we can turn this around, and which practical strategies can be applied to reach the stakeholders? And I think maybe that's the first question to Sam.
Well, I think actually even the demonstrations of the outputs of the task force already beg the question to reopen those policies if they have been adopted, applying one particular classification methodology that singles out one parameter. I think the second element, of course, is really to bring what we are doing to a global, forum. And of course, I think bringing this discussion within Codex is probably, one of the next phases that we would consider, including really to trigger a discussion. So the idea is not necessarily to aim for an immediate conclusion, but to really have the discussion on the methodologies and on the how we are trying to apply these methodologies to guide public policy decisions. So, I would not exclude from us the possibility of bringing a discussion paper to one of the Codex committees, or even more than one. It could be CCNFSDU, it could be also CCFL, for those who don't know the acronym. So it's really the Nutrition Committee of Codex and the Food for Special Dietary Uses, but also the Labeling Committee of Codex. These tend to be some of the committees where these systems and these methodologies would have impacts on the decision-making process.
Thank you very much. Then there are a lot of questions which go into the content and the details. So there are some questions to know if the data exists that would permit the inclusion of ingredients to extend the work that you have done, like flavors, colors, preservatives, emulsifiers, sweeteners, sugars, etc. If they are included in the consideration of the ingredients, if they are considered in the ingredients used for cosmetic purposes, as you mentioned, Dr. Windhout.
Yeah. Thanks for this question, because it's a crucial question. So when we look at what we discuss also very intensively in the context of NOVA is all these specific ingredients. And I think, this is exactly why I wanted to demonstrate, and also my previous answer to the NRF, that we can widen the frame of what we consider. Let's consider terms for ingredients, let's say for emulsifiers, for special types of classes of ingredients. And we can introduce terms if we think they have a negative impact with a minus sign, and we can weight them with numbers which are mostly available via Codex. I mean, Codex is doing since decades analysis of additives, and so we could weight, let's say, such components, be it helpful components in the food manufacturer, be it flavors, colors, whatsoever. We could weight this and bring it into this NRF, in this formulation definition, and then see what can a process do with it. If a process could, in principle, destroy something which is negative, then it would be a negative outcome of the processing. If the process would enhance something which is seen critical, so you would see it as well. But you could differentiate. What are we doing wrongly or exaggerate from the formulation perspective, and how could we, let's say, kind of limit this by processing actions, or we may have to make a choice of processing actions which are not supporting, let's say, some negative impacts. I think this is the part of the creative work to generate terms in the description of a nutrition value, to have terms describing positive or negative aspects of ingredients or processing aids or components which may be generated in the process and so forth. I mean, this is exactly this open creative frame for this NRF and the related delta NRF.
Thank you. Yeah, and maybe you can redirect the question to somebody else, but the question is that the approach is focused on nutrition, loss and preservation. Would it also become possible in the near future to look at food groups like fruit, vegetable, nuts, seeds, and even include specific amino acids?
Absolutely. I mean, this is not excluded at all. I mean, you saw in the normal NRF scheme, you have the wide range from the sweetened beverages to the fruits to the vegetables to the database sometimes is a bit weak when you look at the same raw material being treated in different ways. So the USDA database was very helpful, but sometimes you have not a consistent line, let's say, having the same raw material which is treated in different follow-up steps. This is data which we have to trying to manage to get the data. Getting access to this data means evaluating a nutrition-rich food index as we define it, not only before we process, but also after a processing step 1, after a processing step 2. There's quite a bit of work to be done. It's a new way thinking about, let's say, databases which take this into account. But I guess it will be fruitful because we have already a lot of data available, which we can tune, let's say, to some extent, but a lot more to be done in order substantiating the work with this IFNPC scheme.
Could I add to that comment that this is such an important area to consider because the food-based approach tends to emphasize food groups. And so when we want to make sure that consumers understand getting enough of the different food groups to meet their nutrient needs. But in the process of formulating a product, sugars can be added, salt can be added, saturated fat, there are many ingredients. And so the idea that this system now integrates those two ways of thinking, what the processing effect is and what the formulation effect is, becomes very important for understanding how a product can fit into a healthful dietary pattern. It's not just that you added vegetables there, it's what else did you add there and how much did you add there? So it's a way of integrating those ideas.
Thanks, Professor Schneebaum, for the addition. There's one other question. It's again a question for the World Health Organization, but maybe Vincenzo, it's for you. About the interaction with WHO to also integrate also in other countries since the early stage initiatives to define UPF, like in India.
That's a very good question. The answer, I don't know. That's what we should do. Actually, mention WHO, but FAO is the same. So at a certain point, up to now, there is a kind of barrier by this, let's say, public health institution, basically driven essentially by a kind of pre-concept that because we are working or we are assisting the food industry, we are not, someone reliable to discuss with of the public health, food and health issues. So indeed. Very good question. We are trying to do something with the European Commission, so starting from another type of angle and there are some more ears to listen us because food and drink sector is such an important sector in Europe, but in all countries. So when you start from the relevance of this sector and cannot be destroyed by this negative communication, you have ears to listen to you. But when you go to the WHO and FAO, that's much more difficult. So I think we all have to think which type of action we can take towards this public health organization to at least to let them listen to us. That would be already a point. Just the possibility to have to say which are our angle on this aspect, and then eventually to convince them in a more balanced approach. But up to now, this is exactly what is lacking, and especially with the new country like India, as has been pointed out. Very good point.
Thank you, Vincenzo. Then a question maybe for Jung-Soo and Barbara, maybe. So it's about the role of registered dietitians and nutritionists. And another question that is also maybe a little bit related to that is in the case of sweeteners. So when you also take into account the positive aspect related to dental health. So it's the relation to nutrition and how you what practical roles do you see there, and also what is the link to other areas of health topics. I would like to start maybe with Jung-Soo.
Yeah, if I say something, as you said, the role of the registered dietitian is very, very important, because they are the person at the forefront to the customer, patient, and so on. So that's why we need not confusing solely the information about the food processing and formulation, and also the classification of food system. That's kind of urgent, because the people keep asking them for their expert opinion. So that's why we have to cooperate together to make the usable, reliable, and accurate and robust food classification system. So that's the one thing I can say now. Barbara, you can.
Yes, I'd like to add two comments. One related to the discussion we had earlier. I would just observe that, the United States issues its dietary guidelines every 5 years, which means there's a comprehensive review every 5 years. And they did include some questions about ultra-processed foods. And one of the difficulties they encountered was varying definitions. How are these foods actually classified and defined? And the second was the nature of the research that was available to them. So it's not that they didn't want to make a recommendation, it's they couldn't get to a place where they had high confidence in their recommendation. But of course, that helps them outline where the research needs are. What do we need to do so we can get to that place of making a recommendation? And then I agree with Dr. Kim. Of course, the registered dietitian is a key person in this in terms of communication. And I think the degree to which we can get to a point where there's a system that they can use effectively, because they have to adapt recommendations to each situation. So they need a framework to work with, not just a set of rules. They need to know how they can adjust to apply the information. And then I think you also had the question about sweeteners, which I think Eric addressed as sort of other food components that can come into the consideration. And even the question of dental health, if you think back on that spider diagram, you could put dental health into that spider diagram as one way of doing it. The other is, if you're doing a systematic review, you can now use dental health as an outcome, but use the kind of parameters that we've been talking about related to formulation and processing to help with that analysis. So I think, again, it's that ability to have a framework that can be expanded to incorporate where we are in terms of trying to address what is a healthful dietary pattern. And I think Eric was going to add to what I was saying.
If I may. So thanks a lot for widening the spider web. So I of course, this is exactly how we should tackle it. I just wanted to add, something, because speaking about ingredients, speaking about additives and so forth, and one remark you made before, Barbara, was we have to adapt it to the region, to the people, to the audience which you have. And I think we do a lot of our discussion so far, also on the Nova side, not including developing countries. And the food fortification means adding minerals, adding vitamins and so forth, because there are strong deficiencies. It's another point and another term in our let's say fortification term, let's say for the NRF, to be included in order to really manage adapting to these other markets where people need the fortified food, and not if this would be demonized by being ultra processed and accordingly not accepted by the people, it would be a disaster. So I think we have to clarify the sky in this respect.
Thank you very much, and I think I have to give the floor back to Lilia again.
I mean, I would like just for us to wrap up, and we will continue this discussion in future webinars, because there's a lot of interesting aspects to consider. So we just ask each of you to wrap up and give your final wording. So I will start with Erich.
I just warmed up, yes. Yeah, what can I say? The discussion shows that what my last sentence in my summary was, let's use it as a starting point. Let's work with it. I would like to end up with, I hope we can encourage many scientists from the different domains, the food scientists, the food engineers, the nutritionists, the public health related people, in order to really work with it, because this has to be treated now in order, and hopefully this is an avalanche of scientists who are committed to do.
Thank you. Shionsu?
Yes, I like to once again emphasize the need for the collaboration between food and nutrition. Plus, without the industrial cooperation, we cannot make story. So we have to include the industry people and, do something together. So that's the one I like to focus. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you so much. So, Barbara.
Right. Thank you. It's been great to participate in this task force and this discussion. And I would just observe that, the interest in the effect of food processing on nutrient value is not new. It has been around for a long time and preceded the development of NOVA. I think what's exciting about the moment we're at right now is that there's an interest and a commitment to try and understand that role of processing, and huge research needs that are out there. But I think it's exciting to see that this is where we're at now. And I think it can improve the advice we give consumers. But my hope is that it also improves the way food is handled by the industry, that they use that to improve processing technology.
Thank you. Makes good sense. So, Vincenzo?
I think a lot has been said already.
Yeah.
One point is I forgot the previous answer, the collaboration with nutritionists. Maybe this is a good way to go through to the WHO and FAO. EFFoST organized this event together with in Belgrade to the European Nutrition Conference, and it was a very good success there. So showing that the dialogue is possible from these two sides of the rivers. We have to create this opportunity. I think this is these webinars is one type of opportunity. I think we have to create more. That's my message with good people in communication, because some of us maybe we are too much into the formula, the processing, and the innovation. So also in the questions there are many points more related to the general innovation than to the topic of this meeting, because it's how we are. We want to do good things, new things, innovative things, and this is something that calls us to reflect on things that for us are a bit given for granted, and so a bit of a humble attitude we have to show in this debate.
Yeah. Thank you, Vincenzo. So I will give the word to Sam.
Well, thank you. I mean, again, I would like to thank all those who contributed to the discussion, and I think I will be finishing also in somewhat similar fashion to all the colleagues, calling really to leverage the work that has been done, calling to continue our collective work. So really, that collaborative work towards well-designed, methodologically sound food classification systems that help provide that clear framework to assess the health impacts of food. One that would empower individuals to make their informed dietary choices and also equip the policymakers for effective and hopefully evidence-based regulatory decisions.
Thank you. Very important. I mean, I then would like to close. I mean, first thank Aries for the leadership of the task force, because it was a long process, and I think very constructive discussions, and your leadership has been very important. So then, of course, I thank the panelists for all these interesting points of view. And as you can see, we are not ready, so we still have more to discuss. So we plan to organize, I mean, at least maybe 4 more webinars. And I mean, some ideas that we have is regarding consumers, how we communicate better with them. Industry was also mentioned, policy. So yeah, keep an eye. We will come back with new information that will be gathered in the time, but also new perspectives and needs of further development. After that, we will also try to answer some of the Q&A questions that have not been answered. Otherwise, feel free to reach to us. Thank you for all organization of this event, and all the attendees that in fact are many. Thank you.
Thank you, everyone. Bye.
Thank you very much. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye,
Thank
everybody.
you.
Bye.